In the meantime, let me just give a small introduction of the organization and welcome everyone. In the meantime, others turn on their video. I'm Dr. Ravi Kumar. I am conference chair for the day. Along with me, I have Dr. Prakriti, who will be co-chairing the session. So I welcome everyone for this international conference organized by IRF Research Forum in association with Warfare and many other IT research and all. So basically, talking about the organization, IRF Research Forum, basically the organization is a decade-old organization, and the organization keeps on conducting conferences, and members meet regularly. Until now, about more than 700 plus online, 700 plus physical conferences have been conducted, and more than 200 plus virtual conferences has been conducted by this organization. And talking about the statistics about the journals and all, the organization has around 10 journals, peer-reviewed journals, and about the people associated with the organization, we have about more than a lakh people have been associated, and more than 50,000 plus papers have been published in the journey of the organization. So this is the overall summary of the organization and its legacy of the same. So without wasting much time, we will quickly go ahead and take up a quick group photo and then start up with the session. So a small request is, as we have like 20 participants, what we will do is we will have a quick 8 minutes for a maximum for a presentation, and we can take the questions online and basically offline, that is in the chat box. So if the participants have anything to ask, they can ask in chat box. First thing. Second thing, I request once the participant have completed their presentation, let they share their details in the chat box after their presentation, like their email address, their university, where they come from, and their area of expertise, so that we will the participants can get in touch also with the other participants after the conference also, because conference is all about we meet here in this type of organization because one, networking, other, to increase our research and identify people in the similar field and explore the opportunities, right? So with this, I would like to start up with the conference. I request Dr. Prakriti to kindly take a group photo in the meantime, and we will start up the session. So others, please turn on the video. Yasin, Dr. Bashir, Lalit, Anwar Hassan, Gabriella, please turn on the video. Anwar Hassan, Gabriella, Dr. Bashir, please turn on the video.
Greetings and good day to the chairperson and fellow researchers. I'm Professor Sirwan Baban. Currently, I'm based in Kurdistan region, Iraq. My first presentation is on managing the impact of climate change on Iraq. Could you see the screen? Hello, could you see the screen?
Oh, yes.
Yes, sir. Please go ahead. Yeah, we are able to see your screen.
Okay, great. We go down to, in terms of structure, I'll introduce the issues and talk about climate change management issues in Iraq. Then we talk about its characteristics. We talk about the challenges and what we need to understand and how to manage it. Then I'll propose using geoinformatics as a management tool. Then I propose a way forward. Then we end up with the conclusions. By way of introduction, I need to have this thing in the middle. The IPCC showed that, I need to have this in the middle. Can I remove this? I need to read this.
Sir, is everything good, sir?
Just a second. Yeah, it's all good now.
Okay.
Right. The as you know, IPCC reports indicated that there's global warming happening over the last 50 years, and that's really directly linked to human activities. And the ongoing changes affect society and have serious impacts on economy, agriculture, health, and the environment. And Iraq is unfortunately among the countries most vulnerable to climate change shocks, in both in physical impacts and also in terms of resources. A1B is the scenario, the IPCC scenario that is relevant to Iraq. And that tells us that there will be increases in temperature and there'll be low rainfall, and the rainfall will become low with high intensity and low frequency. Also, we know that the precipitation in the highland countries from which we get our water will be reduced by 10 to 60%. And we also know that upstream countries have plans to build a series of major dams and diversion schemes. This in a context where Iraq has a rapidly growing population, which is expected to double. Now, all these factors collectively, if not managed, could lead to continuous degradation of the environment and natural resources. And in fact, we're beginning to see some symptoms of climate change. There is a rapid expansion of desertification, frequent and intense dust storms, prolonged dust conditions and heat waves, and sometimes reach above 50 degrees centigrade. As it could be demonstrated in these figures. Figure 2 shows the floods in Erbil, where I'm based, in 2022. In fact, for the last few days, we've been having similar floods only yesterday. Now, let's talk about the characteristics of climate change management in Iraq. It's reactive and it's focused on cleanup and repair. It's heavily reliant on hard engineering approaches. It focuses on short-term relief. Data collection is done sporadically and often lacks metadata. Aid organizations that work here usually limited to short period of time and limited geographical areas. And the coordination is very poor and fragmented. So the challenges, and I'll go through them: information poverty. Iraq suffers from scarcity of reliable and compatible data sets. So we face a number of information poverty, conceptual issues that are hindering climate change work. In terms of conceptual and political issues, it's that climate change work requires clarity. Whilst the issue of management here is surrounded by uncertainty. And we know that government decision makers, before funding and budgeting of a project, tend to evaluate clarity, practicality, timing, as well as desirability at a particular time. And when these things lack, leads to lack of political interest in climate change management. Now, how to understand climate change management issues in Iraq? We need to understand and manage the links between environment change, society's well-being, and promoting effective interventions. As humans, in terms of science, we've always done that by seeking patterns, processes in the environment, and that is being achieved through mapping the distribution of the phenomenon in space. Then we tend to ask why, to understand the spatial connections in space. Then getting information during various times, that will give you the monitoring, followed by an attempt to model the real world. The best way we understand it, we come up with management scenarios. And that idea is illustrated in the following figure, where you observe, then you map, then mapping over different slices of time will give you the monitoring, then you do the modeling. Now, I'm proposing geoinformatics as a management tool, and by here I'm referring to remote sensing, GPS, and GIS. And by remote sensing, I particularly refer to environmental remote sensing, which could provide information for mapping, monitoring, and management. Remember, here we have a lack of information. These will help with defining climate change impacts. It provides information on the elements impacted upon by climate change, like information on land use, land cover, water resources, topography, human distribution and activities. Will also supply a synoptic coverage and provide information for monitoring change caused by climate change over appropriate periods of time. Let's look at GIS as a tool. It was developed as a technology for developing location-based solutions and promoting a structural approach to problem solving. So it could help us with managing, analyzing, and integrating all available data sets, employing the spatial analysis, visualization, and query capabilities to answer the questions which we need to answer: what is where and why. Also identify the elements, the land use, land cover, and climate change impacts. Therefore, geoinformatics can be an effective tool to do several things: to obtain the necessary accurate information through remote sensing, and assist in the identification and the mapping, while the GIS will help with handling the data and developing management solutions. And the following diagram will illustrate the uses of GIS in this context for decision-making. It's level 1, operational applications, level 2 is management applications, and level 3 is strategic applications. So we come now to planning for climate change management. I'm proposing a way forward. We need a plan, and this said the plan needs to focus on a national effort to coordinate, collect, and manage the necessary data sets, to develop a scientific understanding with the processes involved in establishing a holistic approach for climate change planning management, to handle the impacts on environment, economy, society, and also to integrate climate change planning and adaptation into government strategic planning at the national level, creating special funds to encourage applied research dealing with adaptation challenges, also developing a national climate change management agenda to mitigate the impacts of climate change on specific locations, such as introducing climate-smart agricultural options to promote drought and heat-resistant crop varieties, and also using agroclimatic and capability maps. This is some work we have done here in Iraq. Also introducing effective irrigation systems and building small dams and water harvesting schemes. This is a land capability for wheat production, which is an outcome of a paper we did in 2016. So demonstrates the applicability of GIS and remote sensing in the case of Iraq. Also developing instruments for climate change management, and this should include, we're proposing early warning systems. We need to coordinate the efforts among all the ministries and agencies. We need to have programs for public awareness and education. And we also need to develop some insurance mechanisms and instruments for managing geohazards and loss reduction measures. Developing plausible management scenarios to account for the effects of climate change on economy. And also we need the help of the international community. So we need to attempt to persuade the international funding agencies to fund quality research and capability building in Iraq. Here we're asking for providing us with satellite imagery to develop management scenarios to account for the climate effects of climate change on economy, in addition to identifying and assisting the most vulnerable groups and people. Conclusions: managing Iraq climate change vulnerabilities faces many challenges and requires a special attention to a strong connection between Iraq's development gaps. There is a real need to establish a national roadmap for climate change management and strengthen government policies for mitigate crisis avoidance and protection of the vulnerable population. We concluded that this object can be realized through establishing a holistic management approach driven by a single national agency to coordinate and manage the impact of climate change in Iraq. The shortage in, and these are the challenges we face, the shortages in reliable and compatible data can be managed through adopting geoinformatics to collect and handle data sets and to develop various planning and adaptation scenarios to examine alternative futures based on different intervention strategies. This knowledge then can be used to manage the impact of climate change on different sectors nationally and to the most vulnerable communities and regions. And this is most important, the lack of political will and effective plans and policies can be managed by sensitizing issues, providing possible practical solutions, and continuous public education, action by civil society, the media, together with effective campaigning methods in order to influence decision makers at every level. And I thank you for listening.
Good afternoon, all. Firstly, I would like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to present in the conference. So myself, Shueka, and my colleague, Ms. Deborah, we conducted a study on parent perspectives of feeding difficulties of children with Down syndrome in Maldives. So this was a pilot study. So it has been documented in literature that Down syndrome, which is known as trisomy 21, has been reported to have lots of feeding difficulties. So as you know, feeding is a skill that that grows with development of sensory and neural and the structural mechanism, and is dependent on experiential learning. So the main aim of feeding would be to provide a safe, age-appropriate, and socially acceptable means of food intake. So feeding can be influenced by many factors, such as that can be presence of any medical condition, the behavioral factors, any treatment, any undergoing treatment, nutritional, psychological, environmental, and any abnormalities in systems associated with feeding. So feeding in Down syndrome, children with Down syndrome have been reported due to they have varieties of structural and neural difficulties. They have intellectual disabilities. They have various physiological characteristics which have been reported to directly or indirectly affect feeding. So it has been reported in the literature that when an assessment or an intervention incorporating both a professional and the caregiver's perspectives is very important, because it helps the caregiver to willingness to increase their willingness in participating in the intervention, and it helps to sustain the intervention in a long run. So phenomenography studies have revealed that there are various socio-cultural differences between different countries which may affect the feeding practices. So one country, Maldives, is a country in which the speech and hearing field is very young, is still emerging. So there are very limited studies that are done on feeding difficulties. So this is the first study that was done on feeding difficulties in Down syndrome. So our aim of the study conducted in Maldives was to explore the parent perspectives of feeding difficulties of children in Down syndrome. So this was a qualitative study, a descriptive study designed for parents of children with Down syndrome. So first we made a conceptual framework which included all the aspects that can affect the feeding. It was to obtain information on all these aspects, so it can be It included aspects like motor, sensory, any presence of medical conditions, behaviors that was related to the child, to the family, to the parent, and other environmental factors. So all that we created one conceptual framework, and after that we made an interview guide. So this contained some of the open-ended questions in which to start the in-depth interview. So questions like, can you describe meal time? So what are the good things that happens in a meal time? What do you think are the bad things that happen in a meal time? So such things, and some probe questions. So probe questions we used when we wanted some detailed information on any aspects, or something like what are the difficulties the child faced during the school snack time. So probe questions like that. So we obtained ethical approval from the institution, and we made a patient information sheet and the consent form, and the patient, each parent was explained orally, and the information sheet was given, and the consent was taken before the interview. So the parents were selected using purposive and snowball sampling from Down Syndrome Association of Maldives. So our inclusion criteria was a parent of a child with Down syndrome having feeding difficulties. The parent has to be a native from Maldives and should be able to understand spoken and written native language, which is Tibehi. And the exclusion criteria was a child who does not have Down syndrome. So finally, we were able to get 11 parents. So 11 parents volunteered to participate in the study, which included 11 mothers and 1 father. The age range of the children was between 2 to 9 years. So our elicitation procedure was, as I explained, in-depth interview. So after the interview, all the responses were recorded and transcribed for each of the parent. Next, moving on to data analysis. So all the transcribed data that we obtained was divided into parts that contain the same content. So these, and a code was assigned for each of the content from each interview. And these codes were collapsed then to categories and subsequently into the themes. So finally, we obtained a hierarchical coding framework for each of the themes. So theme to category to codes for each. So the ethical considerations that we obtained considered for our study was, the subject selected for the study was on voluntary participation. So each, as I mentioned, each parent was explained orally, and written information sheet was given prior to the interview, and informed consent was taken, and the identity of the participants was kept confidential, and the audio recordings that we obtained were only used for analysis purpose. So moving on to the results. So there were totally 4 themes that developed under the theme 1. The theme 1 consisted of all the causes that we felt that the parents have reported that contributed to the feeding difficulty. So things like children that having sensory difficulties, medical, having history of feeding difficulties that have increased. Now any issues that happened during the hospital stay, like after the delivery, any medical conditions that have, then the child having any motor or structural deficits, for example, like cleft palate or any weakness, and then the parents' beliefs and awareness. So parents' beliefs and awareness we included in this category because we felt that it was one of the things that had led to the feeding difficulties. So things like they unable to identify a certain behavior as a feeding difficulty, or maybe their belief that some of the behaviors that the child showed are normal. So such things that due to such things they did not seek any medical treatment for this, so which led to increase of the feeding difficulties later. And some of the responses that we obtained from the parents were things like my child will gag if my child sees food. I need to break pieces. I need to break the food into pieces and give. So immunity is naturally low in these children. So these are some of the responses that we obtained in this theme. So moving on to the next theme. Next is meal time. So everything that incorporated all that were included due to for the meal time. So things like feeding skills, difficulties that they face in eating, type of food, quantity, dependence in feeding, and the child's behavior during mealtime. So all the characteristics that are included involved during a mealtime were categorized under this theme. So some of the responses that we obtained for this were, for example, if I give a bigger piece, my child will stuff it into the mouth, my child will gag. So if I give a bit more, after some time, my child will vomit. So my child has to be fed. So she'll get angry. So all the behaviors or the feeding difficulties, everything that comes under the mealtime was categorized under this theme. So the next was strategy, next theme. So all the strategies that the parents used for feeding, to compensate for the feeding difficulties were categorized under this theme. So some of the solutions that they use, for example, adding more calories in the food, adding sugar in the feeding bottles, so such things, and treatments that they have taken, using of screen. So as you can see, 9 parents have reported that they use screen as to compensate to make the child eat better, and the parents' wishes. So some of the things that they wish to have to help for the feeding difficulties, all these were categorized under this theme. So some of the responses that we obtained were, for example, I'm very careful of not giving more food. If the child gets cold or anything is noticed, doctor will start antibiotics because of child getting an pneumonia, and then things that I need to show screen. So these are some of the responses that we obtained for this theme. And the last theme was consequences. So all the impact of all the feeding difficulties that the parents have reported, what are the different aspects that it had an impact. So some things like growth in immunity, parents' feelings, others' responses, others means like friends, other family members, neighbors. So what were their responses? So then the impact on the family, impact in the school, eating out, child's well-being, and other responsibilities that has to be done. So some of the responses that we obtained were, for example, my child doesn't increase weight, so I get so sad, I cannot sleep at night. During the snack time, be kept separately, that is in school. So, and only in the evening I'll be able to relax. So these are like, I'm very exhausted. These are some of the responses that showed that it had a great impact on the child and even on the parent. So finally, after our results, we were able to make a cascade of the feeding, all the different aspects. So first, all the causes of the feeding, which led to all the difficulties that happened during the meal time, and then which led to all the strategies that the parents used to compensate for the feeding difficulties, and what are the impact on these difficulties on the parent and the child. So this was a two-way, road. Okay, so to summarize, so our pilot study aimed to explore the difficulties from the parents' perspective. So the results included all the 4 themes: one on the causes of feeding difficulties, all the behaviors that affected the meal time, the different strategies, and all the consequences of the feeding on the child and the parent. So the mealtime difficulties resulted in parents using adaptive and maladaptive strategies. That were the things that we found, and we found that children's feeding difficulties had negative effects on the parent and children, which increased the stress relationships and restriction in participation. So the implications of our study was, in theoretical view, it helped to fill the gap on the knowledge of feeding difficulties faced by parents of children with Down syndrome in Maldives. So this would serve as a base for the future research in this area. And in practical, the information that we obtained from our study helped to develop an insight on the feeding difficulties, so which would help in our assessment and intervention of these children in future. And coming to methodological considerations, so in our interviews were conducted online. So we thought that this might influence some of the amount of information that we might miss some of the information like non-verbal cues, but it increased privacy. That is something we noted, and it was easier for parents to speak about these sensitive matters when it was online. So, and then we found that the parents had experience of parenting a child, which made it easier. So they or either the child had an older or a younger sibling, so which means that the parent had an experience of parenting a typical child, so the parent was able to identify any problematic behaviors. So, and the majority of the participants were mothers who volunteered for the study, but we were able to get one father's perspective. So this was important, we felt, because the roles of both mother and father may be different in a family. So obtaining both perspectives would be important. And then the saturation might not have been reached because it's a pilot study, and only 11 parents participated in this, but we still were able to get a variety of great variety of information, considering that this was a pilot study. So these are my references. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.